Hey everyone. So this video is an overview of the ICONS simulation, the ICONS UN Security Council simulation that you're going to be doing for POS 120 Introduction to World Politics. And before you move too much further in this video, you may want to just hop over into Blackboard in the Assignment and Study Guides folder. There's a subfolder that says ICONS simulation. And within there, you have all the assignments associated with the ICONS simulation, but you also have this ICONS simulation guide. And many of the things that I go through in this video are also contained in that guide. So that's a helpful resource that you can refer to as you're moving through this video. And you'll also probably need to refer back to it at various points throughout the simulation itself, just to kind of keep track of what you'll be expected to do and how to access different things and what the different materials and resources available to you are. So you may want to download that or even print it off and kind of refer to it not only throughout this video but also throughout the simulation itself. So in this video I'm going to go through what a simulation is and what specifically we'll be doing with this simulation. The simulation that you'll be doing in this course is designed to simulate country negotiations before the UN Security Council. And all of you will be playing the role of ambassadors from your country to the United Nations, to the global community at large. Now, simulations as a tool in education, if you've done a simulation before, you might have a sense of what this is, but this is really a tool that's designed to ensure that there's some kind of active application of knowledge. So thus far in the course, a lot of what you've been doing is kind of receiving information and hopefully comprehending it, right? Eventually we'll have exams in which you'll be asked to demonstrate knowledge. But a lot of what we've been doing is passive, right? There's lectures, there's reading material, you engage with it, and then you demonstrate that you understand and can produce that knowledge that's been provided to you. Simulations are different. Simulations are designed to be active, and it's not just comprehending material, but applying and utilizing material and engaging with your fellow learners. So I try to do this in most of my classes where it's not simply receiving content and then reproducing it, but also demonstrating the ability to apply it and hopefully in the most engaged and realistic setting that we can. So in this particular simulation, you're representing country ambassadors to the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council is the wing of the UN, the sub-entity within the United Nations that deals with matters of war and peace, international security, violence, and conflict. It's one of the most powerful and important entities within the United Nations. It has the ability to authorize the use of force. It has the ability to condemn the actions of a country if it's felt that they are threatening global peace, they're threatening the global community. And their decisions have the force of law. So a UN Security Council resolution that passes successfully through the UN Security Council has the status of international law. A lot of times what goes before the UN Security Council is some sort of authorization of use of force, but it can also be what we call coercive diplomacy. So for instance, if there was a country that was developing weapons that they weren't supposed to be developing, or if there was a country that was had crossed over into the border of its neighboring country and therefore violated their sovereignty, and there were to be economic sanctions to punish them, right? Then the UN Security Council might receive that as a resolution. They would have to decide, does this in fact constitute something grave and serious enough that we should authorize the use of economic sanctions? Specifically in this simulation, you're going to be engaged in informal and formal negotiations on two resolutions on two different issues before the UN Security Council. So the first issue is militarization and territorial occupation of the region in the Arctic Circle, which is a very real and ongoing issue. And the second resolution has to do with human trafficking. so the illicit smuggling of human beings in the region known as the MENA, the Middle East and North Africa, right? So these are the two resolutions that you'll be dealing with. You start in this initial week just kind of learning about your country, its role on the UN Security Council, the different interests and issues that it considers to be important and it would want to defend and represent before the Security Council. And then we move through informal negotiations in which countries are either communicating with one another one-on-one, or they're engaged in multilateral negotiations in which there's groups of countries communicating with one another. Then we have the formal negotiations that take place in the council chambers, where all communications are public. The ability to communicate one-on-one or in small groups with countries goes away, and everything must be presented to the council as a whole. And then you'll be voting on these resolutions. In order for a resolution to pass the UN Security Council, it needs 9 votes, and none of the what we call the permanent 5 members can vote against it. So there is a permanent group of 5 countries who have what is called veto power: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. These countries are always on the UN Security Council. They have been on the UN Security Council basically since its founding, and they have the ability to override decisions of the council itself. So if one of those countries votes against a resolution, it doesn't move forward. So those 5 countries have an inordinate amount of power on the UN Security Council. Those other 10 countries, they rotate on and off. It's a coveted position. Countries want to be on the Security Council because of the notoriety of that entity, the prestige associated with it, and the fact that they can try and leverage that position to get other things that they want in international negotiations. But those 5 countries are the permanent members. The other countries are non-permanent members. So that's where we'll wrap up at the end of week 5. And throughout the course of this simulation, you have a series of short assignments. And those are basically designed first to prepare you, to arm you with the information that you need in order to represent your country well. And then at various points in the simulation, you'll be reflecting back and thinking about what is happening in relation to the course material. So there's assignments asking you to think about what's happening in the simulation in relation to what we're doing in the course. So that's a quick overview of the simulation. What you've received at this point is an email from me that includes your country assignment. I did the best I could in terms of preferences. Understandably, some of those very powerful, prestigious roles like the permanent 5 tend to be in high demand, and I can't satisfy everybody, so I apologize. But in most cases, in almost all cases, I was able to give folks at least one of the countries that you expressed a preference for. In a few cases, I wasn't able to do so, and I apologize, but it was probably due to the fact that your request came in a little bit later than other requests, and so some of those more high demand roles and country assignments had already been filled. In addition to your country assignment, that email is going to tell you any special roles that you have. So if you are a member of the Permanent 5, it will tell you. There is a president of the UN Security Council. That is a rotating role. It is largely procedural and formal. So right now, Japan is the president of the UN Security Council. Basically, what that enables you to do is to set the agenda for the formal negotiation period when votes are taken in that final week of the simulation and everyone has voted. The president would report out that result, whether or not the resolution passed and what the votes were. And in determining the agenda, they can also determine things like the order of the vote. If there are to be issues discussed in the formal negotiation period that are not related specifically to those resolutions, they can introduce those issues. And earlier in the simulation too, so if countries wanted to request a meeting in the council chamber, so instead of sending messages back and forth, they could meet in real time, they would make that request to the president and they would have to approve it. So that's essentially what the presidency does. They also do formal things like, convening folks and welcoming folks and, just basic kind of diplomatic niceties. And then lastly, that email is going to tell you whether or not you're a sponsor of a resolution. So as a sponsor of a resolution, you want to do everything you can in order to get that resolution passed. So that is going to be kind of your core responsibility, your core role. So it'll tell you about any of those special roles. It will also give you instructions on how to access the simulation. If anything in that email is unclear, if you're not sure what to do based on the information contained in that email, I just ask that you contact me and we can figure it out. And then there'll be some info about logging in and the resources available on the ICONS website, which is what I'm going to jump into right now. So before I go actually onto the ICONS platform, I just want to show you in Blackboard some of the materials available there. So let me hop over into Blackboard. This is what you would see, or some version of this, on the course site for our course on Blackboard. Now in assignments and study guides, you see that there is a link to the ICONS website should you need it, and also this folder, ICONS Simulation Guide and Assignments, which I mentioned. So in there you have the ICONS Simulation Guide, which again I recommend you read closely before you actually move into the ICONS platform or start doing any work related to the simulation. And then you have these assignments. So you do 3 assignments associated with the ICONS simulation. And these are the assignments, so you can see specifically what you're going to be asked to do, and these are the due dates. So you might want to take a look at those, and also just note that when they're due, you would just go into the assignment Dropbox, and then each of those assignments has a specific Dropbox link where you would click, and then you would attach that assignment as an attachment, either a PDF or a Word document. So hopefully that should all be pretty straightforward, and if you've done any sort of assignments on Blackboard before, you know how to do that. All right, so I'll shift from Blackboard into the ICONS platform itself. So the ICONS platform is entirely web-based. You don't need to download anything. There's not an app for it. You can access it all through whatever internet browser you use. And ICONS itself has actually been in this game for a long time. So ICONS was one of the first entities to develop simulations on international issues. It started really with courses on world politics and international relations. I actually remember doing an ICONS simulation all the way back in like 1999 or 2000 when I was an undergrad. And it's gotten a little flashier and a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, but ICONS is pretty much doing the same thing it's been doing for 20 years. And it was effective then, and I think it's effective now. For the most part, students really enjoy this simulation, and they do a good job ensuring that the materials are up to date and they're about timely issues, and that the platform works well and it's problem-free and there's no glitches or issues. So they have a range of different products that they offer, simulation products. Most of their business is in education, but they do stuff for government and private business and NGOs as well. and they've conducted a lot of research in relation to their products and the actual learning outcomes and how they work, and it's pretty impressive. So ICONS is the platform that we're going to use. In the email that you receive from me, you have a personalized login link, and so I want to show you what that looks like a little bit. So this is just the login link for Bulgaria, right? When you click on that login link, you'll see something like this. The country name might change, and then information about the simulation itself. And what you do is just provide your info, so your first and last name, and then your email. And when you click continue here, that is going to take you to a secure payment processing center in which you would pay for the simulation. So the simulation does cost money. It's $13, and it's external to the University of Maine, so there is a cost associated with it. But in my opinion, it's well worth it, and it's a modest fee for what you get out of the experience. So once you do this, you provide your payment info. You'll get your username and password that will be sent to you via email. And then you'll actually be able to log into the icon simulation itself. You can see the platform and what it looks like. So to log into icons, you can either go to the main page and just click on this red login button at the top, or icons.umd.edu/login will also get you there, right? So that's the direct link. The one thing that you will need every time that you sign in is the simulation number, which for us is 5679. Okay, and then you would just provide your username and your password. You'd log in, and this may look a little bit different for me than it does for you because I am the administrator for the simulation. So you probably won't have this select role option that comes up. I'll just say that my role for the simulation is what's called the SimCon, basically an administrator and a moderator. But I do have the ability to go in and select countries, select country roles, and interact with the simulation in that way. Now, in this case, I'm not going to do that because those country roles are yours, and I wouldn't want to post messages on your behalf or do anything. Like, that's your responsibility. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just going to sign in as a country so that you can see what the platform looks like from that perspective. But know that once the simulation is up and going, I'll only be interacting as the SimCon. If you see the SimCon active in the simulation, that's me. Or if a message is posted by the SimCon, that is also me. Okay, so I'll select Bulgaria and just show you what that platform looks like. So once you log in, this is what you're going to see. This is kind of the home page. You'll be able to see if there are other active teams, and all of you are individually assigned. There's no teams, so this will just be other country representatives. You'll see who's online, and then it also tells you how many messages you have and whether or not you have unread messages. So this is particularly important. Once messages start flying back and forth, you want to be regularly checking messages and responding as quickly as you can, because sometimes things are time sensitive. Countries are trying to reach agreements and build relationships, and if you're lagging behind, several hours or several days after an initial message is sent, you're kind of leaving your other country representatives hanging. Also, if you're not up to date on messages, if you're not regularly checking messages, it's very easy to get overwhelmed, because once messages start being sent, there's a lot of them. Okay. Now, in order to access messages, you just click on this Messages tab. This is the primary way that you're going to communicate during the informal negotiations. So that first week of the actual simulation being up and running, this is where you would be sending those messages back and forth. When you click on Compose Message, it's basically like sending something on a message board or sending an email. You have the option to send a message to everybody in the simulation, including the SimCon if you would like, or you can select individual countries. Now, this is important. If you're talking about sensitive information, if there's a number of countries saying, we just don't trust Turkey, we don't know what they're up to, and you send it to all, that's going to be a diplomatic faux pas. So you want to make sure that you're sending it to the right countries and you're not including anyone that shouldn't be included. And you also have the option of choosing an issue. This just helps in terms of categorization when there's a lot of messages, and say you only want to look at messages related to the human trafficking resolution, then you can select human trafficking. And when people are looking for messages, that will enable them to categorize it. There's also procedural. So if you're sending a message out and it doesn't relate specifically to either resolution, then you can click procedural. And in general, you want to give your message a subject line that actually relates to pretty clearly to what the message is about. You have the option to provide attachments. So, if you found an article that is very useful and related to what you're discussing, you can attach that file. And then when you're done, you could just send the message, and that will go into the inboxes of everybody that was included. Okay. So as I said, that first week, informal negotiations are going to happen here. You can send individual messages to individual countries. You can address the group as a whole. You can choose subsets of countries. So say that you're representing South Africa and you want to reach out to the other African countries within the simulation. You could choose Morocco and Nigeria and have a thread going between those countries, right? So that informal negotiation is pretty open and pretty loose, and all sorts of backdealing and side channels and private conversations can happen in that setting. Now, when we shift to the chamber, that's a different sort of thing. So the council president, Japan, will determine the agenda, and they will set up a meeting in the council chamber that runs for that week of formal negotiations, right? So when you log on that week and click current meetings, it will be here, right? And similar sort of thing in that you're sending messages back and forth, but now the option to communicate individually or in small groups of countries is gone. Anything that you say has to be publicly communicated in the council chamber. You can also use the chamber in that first week if the sending messages back and forth is getting confusing and you want to have a real-time conversation with other delegations. You can do that in the chamber. You just have to request it from the council president. But say that you're 10 messages deep with Turkey and Nigeria, and you just want to set up a meeting in which the three of you can talk in real time, and you can schedule a time that works. You would just request to do so. But for the most part, we use the chamber for that second week of formal negotiations. Okay, so that is what will happen here. Voting will happen in this setting. That will be done through the chamber. And this will primarily be used for that week of formal negotiations. Now, the other tabs here I'll just run through quickly. One is resolutions, right? So we are considering two resolutions. Human trafficking in the MENA region, which is sponsored by France, and the Arctic Circle, which is sponsored by Russia. Here, when you click on this, it provides you with the actual text of the resolution. And one of the outcomes of the informal negotiation process can be to recommend changes or amendments to these resolutions. So the actual countries that would have the ability to edit these resolutions are the country sponsors. So if you look at this and you're dissatisfied with the resolution or you want to see changes, you would be lobbying France to make those changes. If you are France and you want to ensure that your resolution passes, you would be thinking about the changes that would need to be made in order for this to actually pass as a resolution. All right, so a couple of things to note here. One is the fact that under status, you'll see that both of these resolutions have a D there, and D just stands for draft. That means that these resolutions at this point can be edited by their sponsors. Now, by the time that first week of informal negotiations wraps up and we're gearing up to do the formal negotiations and voting in the chamber, the resolution sponsors, France and Russia, will need to make any changes, any edits they want to make, and finalize these. So by the time you're actually voting in the chamber, you'll be voting on the finalized version of these resolutions, and they can no longer be edited. So this first week of informal negotiation is actually very important in that it determines the content that you then vote on in the final week of formal negotiations. You also see that these resolutions have version numbers, and so as edits are made, this will shift from version 1 to version 2 to version 3, etc., until the country sponsor has made as many edits as they're willing to make, and they have a finalized version that they are satisfied with. So this is one of the things to kind of keep in mind as you're engaging in that informal negotiation the first week, is that the objective is to, if you're a country sponsor, you want to try to have the resolution that you think that you can get passed And if you're another country representative, you want to try to have the version of the resolution that you are comfortable voting on. Or if you're not, that potentially impacts your vote in the final week and how you deliberate in that final week in the public negotiations in the council chamber. A couple things that are of use to you in this resources tab. First off, you have the scenario. Scenario is going to provide overview on the UN Security Council and what it is, what it has done historically. It's also going to provide issue briefs on the issues before the council, right? So there's some information there about your role as a diplomat, just the general role of country representatives on the Security Council. And then when you scroll down, there's issue briefs for these specific issues that are contained within the resolutions. So the resolution text can be kind of legalistic, difficult to read, and this is going to provide you a concise and clear overview of what the actual issues are before the council. One thing to keep in mind is that for this specific version of the simulation, we're only dealing with the Arctic Circle and human trafficking. There are versions of this simulation that include up to 4 resolutions, but for the purposes of a 6-week course, I've limited it to 2, and just the human trafficking and the Arctic Circle resolution. So just disregard these other 2 issues. So that will provide you information about what these issues are, why different countries have different interests, some of the kind of background and context. If you move into role sheet, that is going to provide you information about your role on the council. So a bit about your country's history, its foreign policy, its role on the UN Security Council, how it tends to behave, who it tends to align itself with, and then where your country stands specifically on the issues. Keep in mind, again, that we're only dealing with the Arctic Circle issue and the human trafficking issue, so you can disregard this additional information. So you're going to want to look at this really closely. In particular, your country on the issues. This is going to tell you about your interests as a country. What is your national interest in relation to these issues? And can help you think about your strategy, right? What do you want to get? What are your objectives? How might you pursue your interests through the informal and formal negotiations? So the role sheet in particular is very helpful. Research library is links to external resources related to these issues. So there's some general information about the UN Security Council itself. There's also issue-specific information on external sources related to what we're considering. So we have the Arctic Circle and human trafficking, again, disregarding these 2 that we are not considering for this version of the simulation. Participant guide, I wouldn't worry about too much. Much of what is here is actually contained within your ICON simulation guide that you've already accessed through Blackboard. Entity information is also very helpful. So this is going to provide an overview of your own country, but it's also going to tell you information about the other countries, their interests, their role in the council, and what types of things they are most concerned about in this simulation. So it can give you a sense of strategy, in particular alliances, potential adversaries, countries it might make sense to be communicating actively with, and others who might be problematic or might pose barriers to you pursuing your interests. And then lastly, the President Guide. This really only applies to Japan. Japan is the president of the UN Security Council, and they have some formal and procedural roles that add a little bit of additional responsibility in that they have to craft the agenda and do things like determine the order in which the resolutions are going to be voted on. But that also gives them some measure of power and the ability to kind of introduce and control the agenda and the flow of the negotiations in ways that can advantage them strategically. So the President Guide will be useful if you're the country representative from Japan, and that representative should also work closely with me to craft an agenda in particular for the final week, the formal voting meeting in the Security Council chamber. Okay, so the last thing I want to do here is just run through the schedule for the simulation and make sure that everybody's clear on what will be happening when and what you'll be responsible for each week as we move through the simulation. So the week numbers here correspond to the week that we're in for the course. So right now we're entering into week 2 of the course, and at this point what I'm expecting you to be doing is signing up for the simulation, accessing the platform, and starting to review some of the materials that are available, especially in the resources section of the ICONS platform. As we move into week 3, what I'd like you to do is start to learn more about your country, again, primarily through the resources section of the ICONS platform, and also the issues. So the 2 resolutions that we're dealing with in this simulation and the underlying issues that drive those resolutions: human trafficking in the Middle East and North Africa, and also the Arctic Circle. And you have an assignment due at the end of week 3, the pre-negotiation planning report. So the pre-negotiation planning report is a series of questions about your country. And what I'm primarily looking for you to do at this point in the simulation is learn a little bit more about your country. What are your country's interests? What has its historical role on the Security Council been? Who does it tend to align with in terms of other countries? And also thinking strategically about countries that you could potentially partner with or who might be willing to work with you as you pursue your objectives moving into the subsequent weeks of the simulation. So that is due on Sunday, June 2nd by the end of the day. And when you get that to me, I'm going to get back to you pretty quickly with feedback, mainly focused on elements of your strategy that you might want to think more carefully about, or suggestions, advice in terms of how you should conduct yourself moving into those informal negotiations. Week 4 is the informal negotiations aspect of the simulation. So remember, that takes place in the Messages tab in the ICONS simulation. And this is the opportunity for you to interact privately with countries or among groups of countries, or you can address the entire chamber. The objective in week 4 is to work on those resolutions. If they look good as is and you're comfortable with them, then you'd be supporting and attempting to align with the resolution sponsors. But if you want to see changes, now is your time to press for those changes, amendments to the resolutions, and to work with other countries to try to bring pressure on the resolution sponsors to make those changes. So by the end of week 4, we'll have final resolutions, and there's actually an assignment in which you reflect on what's happened thus far in the simulation. So thinking about your strategy, your objectives, any obstacles you've encountered, or alliances that you've formed in the course of these informal negotiations. And so that will be due at the end of week 4 on that Sunday, end of the day. As we move into week 5, the resolutions themselves will be finalized, and then we'll have the formal UN Security Council meeting in the Council chamber. So this is a formal meeting. The agenda will be circulated by the UN Security Council President, Japan. It will tell you when issues are going to be discussed and when votes will happen. And you'll have the votes on the specific resolutions in which your country can vote yes, no, or you can abstain. And all of the voting and the formal meeting component will be wrapped up by Friday. Now, the actual kind of timing of individual votes, that will be determined by Japan when they construct the agenda. But you'll be done with the actual negotiation portion of the simulation by Friday, June 14th at 10 p.m. Then you only have one aspect of the assignment left, which is the final reflection paper. So what I'll do as we move into week 6, the final week of the class, is circulate a debrief on the simulation, which will be a summary from me of what happened over the course of the 2 weeks, the informal negotiation and the formal meeting, and anything that was particularly noteworthy or interesting, and also the outcomes of the resolution votes. And then, on the basis of your experience with the simulation and that debrief, you'll be writing a final reflection paper, which will be the last thing that you do for this class. The reflection paper is due on Sunday, June 23rd, the end of the day. And all of these assignments, the pre-negotiation planning report, the midpoint report, and then your final reflection paper, are available now in the study guides and assignments folder in Blackboard, so you can actually see what I'm going to be asking you to do. So one final note about the ICONS simulation, and that is that active participation in the simulation is really essential. So it's a significant portion of your grade. and your overall grade for the course. And I'm actually able to go in and see how much time you're spending reviewing materials related to the simulation and engaging with your fellow students via analytics. And I can also see all of the messages that you send in Icons. So even if there's private messages between individual countries, I'm aware of who is communicating on Icons and to what extent they're communicating. So there's a real kind of material incentive, instrumental incentive in your grade for you to be active on Icons. But beyond that, I think in general, the more engaged and interactive this experience is, the better it is for everyone involved. The better it is for you, the better it is for your classmates. So the more that you participate, the more that you're interacting with countries, responding promptly to messages, trying to anticipate what other countries are doing and be strategic and achieve your objectives, it just creates a much more dynamic and exciting and fun environment. And also through that, you're going to learn a lot more. So I would encourage you to participate actively, not only for the sake of your own grade, but just for a better overall experience. And in particular, if other countries and representatives are sending you messages, try to get back to them as quickly as possible so that the overall flow of the simulation doesn't drag or lag along in any way. So I've thrown a lot of information at you pretty quickly. I would encourage you to review the simulation guide that's available through Blackboard really closely. And if you run into any questions or there's anything that you're kind of anxious about, you're not sure how it's going to work, don't hesitate to get in touch with me either through email or we can chat during office hours. I think this will be a really fun experience for you all. In the past, students have cited this experience as one of the more enjoyable aspects of this course or any online course that they've taken. So I think this will be a lot of fun, and I hope you'll enjoy it. All right, so we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much.